Hi, I'm Charlie with Precision Matthews, and I thought a good way to conclude our series on machine shop tools was to raid my toolbox and pull out some things you might not have seen before. Apologies in advance to the people who complain that watching these videos makes you spend money on things you didn't know you needed. I tried to include some less expensive tools this time to give your wallet a break. Let's get started. We'll start with a tool that, even if you're familiar with it, you may not have seen all the different ways it can be used. That's the so-called unimic. It's an outside micrometer with interchangeable anvils. There's a thin flat anvil and a round rod that it comes with, and you can also use a gauge block or gauge pin in certain situations where appropriate. And yes, I own both the Starrett and Mitutoyo versions. We've already covered that I have a tool buying problem, and sometimes a deal is too good to pass up. The most common use for this tool is to take outside measurements in situations where there's not clearance for regular outside micrometers, like on this part that I totally didn't just pull out of the scrap bin and cut a slot on. Probably 90% of the time, this tool has the flat anvil on it, and it's being used just like this. When you swap to the round anvil, you can measure things like this dimension here. That is the distance from the end of the part to the tangent of the hole that's been drilled. With that measurement and the size of the hole, we can very accurately measure the absolute location of the center of the hole. That's useful on reamed holes for alignment pins, for example. Another common use for this setup is to measure wall thickness of round tubing or anything else with an inside radius. You wouldn't be able to do this with a normal micrometer because the square fixed anvil would not bottom out on the internal radius of the pipe. You can, of course, measure an internal radius by putting a ball bearing of known size against the fixed anvil of a regular micrometer, but I only have two hands, and I like to avoid arithmetic when possible. The last method we'll discuss uses the unimic as a height gauge to measure this dimension right here. Because of the narrowness of the top ledge, it's hard to get the regular depth mic to sit flush and get an accurate reading. So if we take the anvil holder off the mic entirely, the top is a precision ground surface that we can rest on the bottom ledge of this part, then take the height measurement that way. Here's another odd measuring tool from my drawer, and this one is so inexpensive that you don't feel bad using it about once a year. Depending on who you ask, you might call this a pi tape or a diameter tape. What's special about this tape is that its markings are all divided by pi. So 1 inch on this tape is 3.14 inches long. As you might guess, this allows you to measure the diameter of larger circular parts without having to have a micrometer or calipers big enough. This one goes out to 6 feet, so it can measure parts that are almost 2 feet in diameter. Useful in your job inspecting engine parts for container ships. You can also use it for your haberdashery side business. That sounds like a gag that I made up, but I'm 100% serious. Hat sizes, at least in the US, are measured by taking the circumference of the hat band and dividing by pi. So if anyone wants to send me a hat for Christmas, I wear a 7 3/4. Enough about measuring, how about some marking? Less than a year ago, I found out about so-called liquid chalk markers, or wet erase markers. They're kind of a halfway between dry erase markers and paint markers. Once they're dry, they don't smudge easily, but they can be wiped clean with Windex or Simple Green. I keep finding new uses, but most often I use these markers for notes and coordinates on whatever I'm machining, especially if it's something that I'm repairing, altering, or don't have a print for. And please no one check if these coordinates make any sense at all. I just rolled the camera and made up some numbers, but I do write on this particular cabinet all the time, since it's right next to the mill. And while it won't smudge or wipe off with just your fingers once it's dry, these numbers wipe clean easily. I also find myself writing directly on parts, usually after measuring and calculating how much more I need to take off. White shows up well on most parts, but I also have a dark red that shows up well on aluminum. And most importantly, like the 24-inch calipers from last video, you can use your new marker to bully your coworkers, play pranks, and generally engage in lighthearted japes, moderate tomfoolery, and general grabassery. So there you have it. 3 tools you might not have been aware of, might not needed, but you might buy anyway. Drop a suggestion in the comments if you think you have a tool that you use in the machine shop that I don't know about. Whoever gets me to buy something I didn't need gets a shout out in a future video. As always, thanks for watching.